Now, backed by popular demand, as we follow up from yesterday's conversation with former Statistician General Dr. Pali Lehohla, for Parliament's vote on the Section 89 panel report has been postponed until the 13th of December. And this, of course, following a special sitting of the National Assembly Programme Committee. And it was the ANC who proposed that this item be moved for Parliament to sort out the logistical challenges around it, because it requires all 400 members of the National Assembly to be at the sitting next Tuesday. And this is, of course, pending the securing of an appropriate venue to house all 400. Now, former South African Statistician General and Director at the Pan-African Institute of Evidence, Dr. Pali Lehohla, is among many South Africans that have added their voice to what has been happening of late, and of course, following the Section 89 panel report. And he joins us again to continue the conversation that we started yesterday. So, Dr. Lehohla, so grateful for you to come back so that we can continue this conversation, because you were saying some very interesting things yesterday, and I think I want to pick it up at that point of accountability, where you had used the example of something that had happened to you, where you had been accused of a theft or something to that nature, and how you dealt with it. Perhaps if we can just go back and just pick up at that point.
Yes, I'll go back, but Ms. Akina, I usually want to foreground things so that we don't narrow on the incidents, but rather get a broader picture. I mean, the National Assembly is not meeting in Parliament because the Parliament was roasted by fire, and they have to seek where to sit. Our crises are so deep that I think we actually have to use this moment to reflect on this series of crises, because they are characterizing something, and that thing is about accountability and governance and taking responsibility. Now, going back to my example, in 2003 or 2002, I was accused to have stolen money and acquired properties. This was despite the fact that all the properties I owed the banks on were annually reported to the minister in charge, which is Trevor Manuel. The question, of course, was, where do I get the money from? And then it was imputed that I stole the money from the census, yet there was no report or record of any money that could have been stolen from the census. The other was that probably statistical analysis software had provided me with some money because I was demanding that that software be expanded in SABC, and any statistics office worth its salt uses statistical analysis software, which was long developed by Dr. Goodnight. So these were the things I was facing. Even prima facie, there was no evidence around these things. But heading an organization and finding a document on my desk alleging these things, which was placed by my secretary, said I found it under the door. I called Trevor Manuel, who was my minister then. I said, Minister, I've got this which is intended for you. I photocopied it for my records, and I'm passing it on to you so that you can act on it. Obviously, I was deep in the census trying to resolve this. I could have taken this up immediately to process it through, but I realized that I have a much bigger task on the census and getting the statistics work. And upon the delivery of the census results, which was now in 2003, July, immediately after that, I went back to Minister Manuel. I said, there was that document. How do we process it? He said, well, and I said, well, I'm here. I can provide all the things that you receive the reports from me. So we agreed that I see Professor Sangweni. And I went to Professor Sangweni. I said, Professor Sangweni, here are the allegations. I've come to present myself to be interrogated and investigated. And they set in motion a forensic audit. And these things can be very nasty. They're not very pleasant when they happen. And of course, it took some time. And finally, they found that there was nothing. The point I think I'm making is when you are in public office, you are under scrutiny at all times. And you should be ready to present yourself without any objection to this, because that's part and parcel of occupying public office. So this is the background, and I would expect the president not to oppose being subjected to scrutiny by Parliament. The laws have been created by Parliament, by the way, to actually present the case for the executive. In this development, what I see is the convergence of assurance systems and accountability systems that consist of the judiciary, which said, Parliament, you don't have means of holding the executive to account after President Zuma's time. So now we have those mechanisms to hold the executive to account. They supplement and complement the other side of governance, which is the Auditor General, where Kimima Kwetu had to be burdened with the responsibility of being police, executioner, and judge all at the same time. I think this is putting South Africa in good stead to move forward and give South Africans hope that ultimately the executive can take its role seriously, Parliament can take its role seriously, and the judiciary, which has been almost the last line of defense, has propelled us forward to taking our country seriously against all this background of fires, floods, COVID, and malfeasance that Zondo has unraveled. So all these things are connected. They cannot be separated. They have to be understood that way. And it puts in place the mechanisms for putting people through the eye of the needle, which the ANC has been talking about. And that mechanism must be in place. And I think the ANC is right to put the step-aside rule and placing the members who aspire to lead society on a high pedestal, which is higher than provision of natural justice. That aspiration is correct, particularly at this time. And therefore, the question is, will the National Assembly vote for this moral high ground that we are stepping on?
Well, by all indications, Dr. Lehohla, it seems as though they will not, because the ANC has come out and clearly stated that they have basically told their members to vote according to the party line. We heard last week Gwede Mantashe, the national chairperson of the ANC, say that they will protect the office of the president. So because he was asked the question about, this matter of protecting a president who is seemingly beleaguered once again, as they did with the previous administration. And he said it does not matter who the individual is, it is about the office that the ANC is protecting, because they obviously want to hold on to that office and the power that comes with it. So in looking at those objective facts before us, this speaks, of course, to the role, the oversight role of Parliament in holding the executive to account. And the ANC, through its majority, if they indeed follow the party line, will be able to quickly make null of this particular process by simply voting against it.
Well, I think there are other mechanisms of recourse that were actually deployed. In this instance, the public protector took the matter in the way it did in the case of President Zuma. And finally, the ANC found itself without an option but to say to their men, time to go. I don't think they would like to see that repeat itself at this point in time. But yes, they are a majority party, but the electorate is watching. And I think it's very, very important. I think their adoption of the step-aside rule, which is a higher standard, the natural justice rule, puts them in a quandrum that they have to confront. And I would say it is the right position to place the step-aside rule above the natural justice, because, particularly when it comes to the president, because precedent has been set in terms of the president being a constitutional being, which was a seminal judgment by Mogoeng, which places the person of the president at a level that is above, higher than anybody else, and therefore the moral obligations and the ethical obligations reign supreme, much more above the legalese that people usually dug and dive on.
So if we look at those who are protecting the president or those who are in support of the president, they feel that the president actually does not have a case to answer in terms of his application in petitioning the Constitutional Court. Some of that is outlined, but also just more generally, there is a sense or a view from those who support the president that this is all politicking. It's in the realm of politics, and it is political enemies trying to subdue or even get rid of him at this stage. But does that really matter in the broader scheme when it comes to transparency and accountability as this constitutional being that is the president, of whom so much is expected, Dr. Lehohla?
Well, I mean, the question and answer on these things will not be very helpful unless we deal with this thing as a form of paradox. And paradoxes are always best answered in metaphors. And metaphors demand that they are idioms. And these idioms give us the kind of wisdom with which we should approach matters of this nature. Three of these idioms are very important. And I don't know how to translate them in English. I'll try and translate them. The first one is that the king is the bag of shit. Not that he himself is shit, but he is a container of that fecal material. The second is that that means the loincloth that you have to put on so that your private parts do not show is a responsibility of your colleagues, your peers. But the most important one that corresponds to Mogoeng's judgment is that the loincloth of the chief king is his loincloth. Nobody should help him do so. So the king at all times must make sure that his loincloth is intact. In this space, we see that the king has opened up his loincloth. And that Fraser saw it. Is not the mistake of Fraser. Whatever the intentions Fraser has, it is incumbent on the king that he doesn't have his loincloth clumsily around himself. So this is the situation. So we are faced with a situation where the king, both in President Zuma and President Ramaphosa, they allowed their loincloth and they lowered their guard. And this is what Mogoeng is bringing to us, that they are a constitutional being. So it is that which has to be protected, the constitutional being. And I think the ruling party has to understand that it is the constitutional being. And that's why they adopted the step aside, which is above natural justice. And it's a standard above natural justice. So they're contradicting themselves. That's the problem. And just as they approach this.
My apologies there. I thought you had concluded that point, Dr. Lehohla. But
so yes, let me go back to my the one idiom which says that the king is a bag of shit. It means that the king is not shit himself, but he's the bag, he contains this. But where the king becomes shit itself, then there is something wrong. These idioms are idioms that are there, are African idioms, and make us understand governance and the quality of governance and the responsibility towards governance. And we have to sit on these idioms in order to understand what we should stand for as a country, as a nation, as a people, particularly the Africans, that we have our own knowledge systems around governance, and we have to embed those in our systems. And that builds on the Ubuntu. So all these are things that we actually have to revive, particularly at this point in time.
Dr. Lehohla, we're out of time, but I just have to quickly ask you, going back to your article, you mentioned that if there's any fault, then that it is with the Section 89 procedure and not with Justice Ngobo and his panel, and that a review cannot be against the report, but against the Section 89 rules that Parliament passed. Maybe just in 2 minutes or so, if you can just talk us through that, please.
Yes, indeed. That is why Justice Ngobo, when he cited to as a defendant in the case, says there's nothing to defend. He has done his job. The report is that of Parliament, and therefore, if there is anything wrong, it is about Parliament, because they've provided the rules post the judgment of President Zuma. And in these rules, they have set out a procedure. I doubt if the Constitutional Court will interfere with that procedure. They will check it to the extent that it violates natural justice. If it doesn't, and I don't think it does, in the way it's crafted, in terms of how it separates the Section 89 and then the impeachment process by Parliament. The two are separated. That the first is a lighter version of just establishing whether there is anything to answer. And Justice Ngobo said there is something to answer. Then the ventilation of the evidence and the calling of people who have to put the evidence before Parliament, including Fraser, including everyone that was concerned with, then starts. So surely, if there is anything that probably may be found, it will be found with the Section 89 rules themselves, which then probably make the case for the president to take this on review. However, I doubt very much that this can be taken on review on the basis of that, because the Section 89 is very clear on what Justice Ngobo was supposed to do and what then the Parliament will have to do because of its convening power and the summoning power. Justice Ngobo doesn't have the summoning power. So he could only deal with what was available to him. And it was very clear that there is no new evidence that you must excavate. You must use the existing documents and then by putting those documents together, see whether the square squares up, the circle closes up. And he said, the square doesn't square up, the circle doesn't circle up. There is evidence that something has to be answered. That's where we are now. Something has to be answered.
Well,
because if these things don't add up.
Thank you so much for your time. That was former Statistician General Dr. Pali Lehohla helping us unpack the latest with regard to that Section 89 report.